Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I landed 20 minutes ahead of schedule, something the captain announced like good news. But the terminal didn't feel early, it felt paused. The line at passport control barely moved. Overhead screens looped a warning in English and Spanish. Temporary health screening in effect. The letters scrolled in sterile blue, like someone was trying to keep panic out of the font. A man in front of me wore a Dodgers cap and held his phone up to translate. I watched the app try to make sense of the message, as if translation might change its meaning. A woman in a blazer repeated the same line with a rehearsed smile. It didn't reach her eyes, just hovered beneath her laminated badge. I tightened my grip on the plastic sleeve holding my passport and paperwork until the edges pressed marks into my fingers. The folder also held the address of my host university. 4 lines of printed English I kept rereading like a prayer I hadn't memorized yet. The customs officer flipped through my documents, stamped the page with a snap like a staple, and handed them back without a word. He pointed toward a side corridor. I stepped that way and froze a little when I saw a soldier standing at the end. Not security, not police, National Guard. His hand, gloved in white, waved me forward. "Quarantine staging," he said. Just 2 words, but the one that stuck in my brain was staging. I told myself it sounded temporary, like a rehearsal, something that would pass, something with an exit. I didn't ask how long it would take. My English is good in a classroom, but in a line of strangers and rifles, it folds in on itself. They led us through a back hallway I hadn't seen on any airport maps. The air was colder there, the lighting harsher. We passed frosted glass doors and a drinking fountain wrapped in yellow tape. At the end stood a nurse with a handheld scanner. She checked each forehead, said nothing, then pressed color-coded stickers onto our chests. Mine was neon yellow, the color of a tennis ball, a black letter B in the center. 2 older men received C. A woman with a sleeping toddler in her arms got A. I asked quietly what the letters meant. The nurse didn't look at me. "Just flow control, honey," she said. Her voice wasn't kind, exactly. It was practiced, like she'd said the same thing 100 times already and didn't want to lie more than necessary. They directed us into what used to be a boarding area, now transformed into a makeshift holding room. Glass walls boxed us in, looking out onto the runway where ground crews moved like normal, like nothing was wrong. Inside, rows of metal cots were pushed close enough to knock knees if you sat down too fast. A TV mounted in the corner played the local news on low volume. No sound, just closed captions. The words at the bottom of the screen read, "Southern California hospitals coordinating with federal responders following surge in flu-like symptoms. Symptoms include prolonged somnolence." That last term made me pause. Somnolence, I remembered it from biology class. Excessive sleepiness, coma adjacent. The anchor kept talking, but the footage switched to a hospital parking lot jammed with ambulances. Too many for a weekday afternoon. I told myself it was old footage, from somewhere else. I told myself it wasn't live. A National Guard sergeant arrived and set up a folding table by the entrance. He placed a box of disposable masks on top. "Everyone take one," he said, calm but without warmth. "This is a precaution. Screening's still ongoing. We'll need you to remain here until further notice." He pointed to a hallway door. "Restrooms are over there. We'll have food and water shortly." He didn't say how long. He didn't mention phones. Mine buzzed in my hand with a new carrier message, "Welcome to the US," and a reminder that international roaming charges applied. I texted the university housing number, just like the orientation packet said to do if I was delayed. A reply came back immediately. "Key will be held until 20 o'clock. After hours access requires emergency code." I stared at the word emergency longer than I needed to. I almost texted my mother in Sendai. I even typed out, "Arrived safely, delayed at airport, quarantine." But I didn't hit send. Not yet. Because I didn't know how to explain that everything still felt normal and wrong at the same time. An older man in a business suit sat on the cot across from me with a carry-on bag balanced on his knees. He had earbuds in, but no sound came from them. He watched the TV's subtitles. "Sleeping sickness," he said, mostly to himself, "like the old one." His accent sounded like he was from anywhere along a long coastline. "They had something like this in the 1920s, he added. "They called it lethargic encephalitis." He said the words as if naming a storm. A woman in scrubs rolled in a cart with bottled water and single-serve crackers. She placed a bottle on my cot and the plastic crinkled like a small fire. I asked her when the screening would finish. She said, "Depends. We'll get you out fast as we can." She looked toward the far end of the room, where a partition hid another cluster of cots. "You're in the overflow. Don't wander off." The overflow had a particular sound to it, not just the murmur of strangers and the low, steady burp of climate control. It was the sound of people saving battery life, the sound of unwrapped crackers, the sound of zippers. Someone's suitcase wheel squeaked when he shifted his bag to rest his feet on it. It made a tiny, repetitive cry, until at last he clenched the handle and held it still. I tried to keep the rhythm of arrival. Wash hands, swap socks, check the list. Copy of I-20, acceptance letter, vaccination record. The little gift my sister had slipped into the pouch with a folded crane, and a note that said, "For bravery in crowded places." I touched the paper crane, and then stopped touching it, afraid it would absorb the nervous oil on my fingers and go soft. The first hint that the quarantine was different from a drill came not from the TV, but from the soldiers. 2 new guard members appeared exactly when the sergeant's shift should have rolled, but they came with a third man in a fleece jacket who had airport ID clipped to his collar. He carried a handset radio with an antenna as long as a pencil and spoke as he walked, not to us, but to whoever listened on the other end. "No, the remote gates are already closed," he said. "Yes, we're holding internationals in TBIT overflow per order. No, we don't have room at baggage for more cot staging." He didn't bother with a smile. He did not look like someone trained to reassure. A woman collapsed near the water table. It was not dramatic. She sat down too fast and slid sideways. A nurse reached her first. The woman's eyes were open. The whites showed under the irises the way a doll's do when tipped the wrong way. The nurse told her to squeeze her fingers, and the woman did not. A second nurse arrived with a soft collar and a strap to keep the woman on her side. "She was fine a minute ago," the first nurse told the sergeant. "She said she felt lightheaded. That's all." No one screamed. It was early in the day for screaming. The woman's child, who had been asleep in her lap, woke and cried into the fabric of the woman's coat. The older business-suited man stood, hesitated, and then sat again, as if the cot had magnetized his hips. A second cot was pulled alongside, and they moved the child to a volunteer who held him and hummed a tune she said she had used for every baby in her family, across years and apartments and different jobs. The sergeant spoke low into a separate radio, not the airport man's, and looked at the partition opposite ours, the one that hid the other cluster of cots. That partition had been quiet until then. Now it had a different quality, as if every breath taken behind it was being measured for a purpose. A doctor with a blue plastic apron over scrubs stepped through and adjusted his mask with a gloved knuckle. He took a breath as someone does before a presentation, but spoke softly enough that only those of us close could hear him. "We're going to separate Groups A and B," he said. "It's temporary. Group C will remain where you are. I will go with Officer Holmes. B will stay here and be reassessed." The nurse handed him a clipboard. He checked it and his finger stopped right above the woman who had fainted. He said, "Move her to the other side, gently." The officer named Holmes had the eyes of someone counting people, not watching them. He moved us along with a half gesture, like an usher guiding late arrivals to their seats. We were not A, we were B. Our stickers seemed brighter suddenly, like hazard tape. The doctor's voice followed the nurses through the partition. "Eyes, check eyes first. Note gaze. Ask them to track you. Remember to log duration." He spoke like a teacher quizzing students on steps they had practiced with mannequins. I texted the student housing again. "Still at the airport. Quarantine. I can come late." The message failed to send. I moved to get better reception near the window and saw beyond our glass the slow ballet of ground vehicles, luggage carts and stair trucks. The aircraft at the nearest gate looked ordinary. It had a logo I had seen 1,000 times in ads. The jet bridge met its door like a handshake. Nothing in that choreography suggested panic. Only the humans behind me did. A man 2 cots down stood suddenly and began pacing. He talked to the ceiling, and then to his palm, and then to no one. "My father is at Cedar Sinai," he said to a volunteer, though he didn't look at her. "He was supposed to have a test. They moved him to a different floor. They said it's a precaution, but they won't let anyone visit. Is that legal? Can they just do that?" The volunteer said the hospital was seeing many patients, but everyone was doing their best, and the man placed both hands on the back of his neck, as if to keep his head from lifting off his shoulders. The TV finally turned its closed captions to a live briefing. A county official mentioned a clustering of atypical neurological presentations, initially misfiled as seasonal influenza, and the anchor summarized that some patients appear to be slipping into prolonged sleep or catatonic states. The word catatonic rolled around the room like a penny in a pan. The business-suited man repeated it softly. The nurse with the teacher voice said, "Let's not jump to conclusions." From the partitioned area, a clatter, the kind of sound a tray makes when it hits the floor and flips. Then a voice, "Hold him. No, not like that. Turn him." The doctor's instructions tightened, clipped down to the muscle and bone of the job. "Protect the airway," he said. A second cot rattled against the metal leg of a chair. I could see, through the gap between the curtain and the wall, the edge of a shoe, the blank sole scuffing tile like someone seeking a step that had disappeared. The sergeant said to the airport ID man, "Shut the external," and the man jabbed a key into a control panel that hummed at waist height. A plate of glass slid silently into the doorway that opened onto the concourse. We were a bubble now, air circulating through a vent only, the glass a mirror when the sun hit it. My face floated over the silhouettes of ground crew outside. I could see my sticker, B. My mind did not think of horror movies. It thought of Japanese class in middle school where we learned to quit a building in a line and not look back. I checked the nearest exit sign for the running figure and the arrow. I looked for fire extinguishers. I counted how many steps from my cot to the bathroom. A TSA officer stood near the restrooms and watched the partition. When the bathroom door opened, her hand went to her belt, not to draw anything, but to touch the radio clip there. A habit to reassure herself it was still there. I did not see the first reanimation. I heard it the way you hear someone getting out of a chair who is trying not to seem old. A groan where a breath should be. The business-suited man's face went white canvas blank, and then he raised both palms, as if telling an invisible driver to slow down. "Sir," the nurse said. "Sir, I need you to stay." The rest of her words were washed out by 2 radios at once. "Code blue partition," someone said. "Lock it down," said the sergeant. The doctor's voice came through like a wire tight enough to cut skin. "Do not try to restrain with your hands. Do not put your hands near." The rest turned into fast syllables. The curtain rattled like a fabric drum when someone slammed into it from the far side. An elbow pushed through the gap between curtain panels. The elbow was bare. It was grey in a way skin becomes when blood circulation quits its job. A young volunteer near me grabbed the stanchion with the flex belt, those retractable belts used to form lines, and dragged it in front of the gap. The TSA officer yelled, "Back up!" The volunteer did not back up. He pulled the belt, clipped it to a post, and then grabbed another post, looping a second belt to form a hasty barrier. His hands shook so hard the belt latch clacked against metal and missed twice before catching. Behind the curtain, a human shape thudded against the temporary barrier with a rhythm that suggested no awareness of other bodies. The doctor's instructions stuttered. Eye protection," he said to someone. The sergeant barked, "Face shields," and the nurse said, "We don't have enough," as if she were apologizing for rain. The thing that stepped through the curtain was a woman in a patient gown. She did not step with purpose. She stepped like someone testing ice. Her eyes tracked nothing. A nurse with a face shield approached with a medical pad held like a shield. "Ma'am," she said, as if there were a ma'am left in that body. The woman moved suddenly, not fast, decisive. She swung her head in a short arc and connected with the nurse's forearm. Not a bite, a strike. It was enough to topple both of them. The nurse rolled, got to her knees, and the TSA officer was there, pulling her behind the line. The sergeant raised his weapon. He did not fire. He spoke into the radio instead, and the words were a code I could not pass. I do not know who first said the word zombie. It wasn't shouted. It was testing a bridge to see if it would hold to step on it. A man said it under his breath, and everyone pretended not to have heard. I kept looking at the woman's feet, bare against the tile, looking for a signal that this was theater. The way toes flex will tell you if a person's mind is inhabiting a body. Her toes flexed without pattern. Her eyes found us, but did not settle on anyone. I had to swallow the instinct to rush the little boy back to his mother. She was behind the partition. The volunteer still hummed, now louder. The business-suited man said in that coast voice, "This isn't how the movies," and then shut his mouth on the sentence. The TSA officer told us to move left and keep cots between us and the partition. "If you can leave your roller luggage, leave it," she said. "You need both hands." Her tone reminded me of announcements in school when the teacher's voice walked a narrow line between calm and command. A second patient moved behind the curtain like a shadow cast by a tree in wind. Then a third. There was a thud like a head hitting metal, hard, and someone said, "She's not responding." And the doctor said, "She is responding. She's responding wrong." The words were dry and unkind, because he couldn't afford kind. He told someone to fetch restraints. He told someone else to cover the eyes. "Keep them covered," he said. "I don't know if it matters. It matters to me." A decision made itself. We were not the patients he could reach. We were the crowd he had to manage. The airport ID man keyed the wall panel again, and a second glass door slid in place, sealing the partition area from our side fully. The woman in the gown bumped against that glass with the soft smack of skin against a window a child presses his face to. No awareness. No startle at the barrier. The glass showed smudges where breath should have fogged. Nothing fogged. The sergeant turned to us. "We are moving groups B and C to secure rooms. Single file. Do not run. Stay alert." He pointed to the TSA officer. "You take point. I'll take the rear." He looked at the volunteer with the humming child. "You stay with me. Do not let go of him." He made eye contact with me, and I felt seen the way a number is seen by a cashier. Counted, necessary, interchangeable. We filed out through a side door I had not noticed, down a corridor lined with out-of-service kiosks displaying screensaver ads for credit cards. The TSA officer spoke into a clipped mic at her collar. "We're moving B and C through Service Corridor 3 to Concourse Room 10, she said. Her stride was measured, not fast. I counted my steps and tried to match hers. The cots behind us rustled as we left, the kind of mass rustle a field makes when wind passes over it. The secure room looked like a conference area that had been stripped for cleaning. No windows. A stack of folded chairs in one corner. A rolling whiteboard stained with the ghost of yesterday's meeting. The TSA officer counted us. The sergeant stationed himself by the door. "You have 15 minutes to use the restroom," he said. "Take water. We're waiting for an all-clear to move you to buses." Buses, I thought. To where? He didn't say. There was a maintenance door at the back with a sign that said, "Authorized personnel only." It was unlocked. At least the handle turned. A janitor with a key ring the size of a grapefruit pushed through with a cart. He wore an airport badge and an expression that said he was used to being invisible to people in suits. He nodded at the sergeant, who nodded back. They knew each other not by name, but by the choreography of working in the same building. "We've got stoppages in the drains," the janitor said, as if reporting a weather pattern. "People's throwing wipes in there like it's the end of the world." He realized what he had said, and looked embarrassed, like he had told a joke on a day it should not be told. He re-angled his cart and excused himself through the maintenance door. I followed him with my eyes and memorized how the door clicked. There was a boy about my age sitting against the wall, with a skateboard balanced over his knees. He wore headphones without music. "You came from where?" he asked me. When I told him, he nodded like he had a favorite ramen shop somewhere across the ocean. He said, "I was going to see my dad in El Segundo. He said he'd pick me up from parking. They told him he can't even enter the loop." He looked at his phone and flipped it in his hand, so it became a piece of plastic instead of a lifeline. I think he's in a parking garage somewhere, listening to the radio. The volunteer with the child sat near the wall and rocked her shoulder gently like a pendulum. The boy had stopped crying. He had the kind of quiet you get when your body runs out of fuel for making sound. I crouched and showed him the paper crane. He touched one wing. "Bird," he said. The volunteer smiled at me and mouthed, "Thank you." 15 minutes extended because no all clear came. The sergeant received a message on his radio and stopped answering questions. He took the TSA officer aside, and the two of them listened to a crackling voice for a full minute without a word. When he returned, he adjusted his vest the way a person adjusts clothing when he'd like to be anywhere else. "We'll stay put for now," he said. "There were incidents on the concourse. We're not going out that way." A woman with a messenger bag asked whether we could call anyone. The sergeant said, "If your phone works, use it now." And nothing in his voice suggested it was a good idea or a bad one. I texted the student housing again. The message floated with a spinning circle and then failed. I tried my mother. It failed. I typed anyway. "I am safe, I think. At the airport. Quarantine. Will write again soon." I pressed save like it was a spell. The janitor returned without his cart. He had a ring of keys and a roll of heavy black trash bags over one wrist. He asked the sergeant if he could refill the bathroom caddies. The sergeant said yes, and then, "What's happening out there?" The janitor considered the ceiling as if the right words were written up there. "There's a lot of sleeping people," he said, "and then some of them aren't sleeping no more. Security closed the Starbucks when the barista couldn't. Well, and there's folks who think the rules aren't for them, like always." He looked at us like we were school children, which in a way we were. I asked him quietly if the maintenance corridors connected to the parking garages. He looked at me like he couldn't decide if I was trouble or help. "Sure," he said, "but not in any way you'd want to go unless you know the route. You can wind up in a utility chase with fans loud enough to knock your teeth loose." He looked at the TSA officer, who looked at the sergeant, who looked at the door. "We're not taking civilians through service," the sergeant said. "That's final." The TV in the corner tried to push the news through the concrete with pixels and captions. A woman with a medical background, she had the posture of someone who does not have time for nonsense, said the words "post-infectious neurological complication" and "movement abnormalities." A graphic showed a timeline: initial fever, then a long sleep, then unexpected motor activity. "We urge calm," she said, and calm is a word leaders say when they've run out of others. A banging started down the hall, not on our door, something metal on the far end. It came in bursts. 3 hits, then silence. 4 hits, then silence. Like someone who had never struck anything before, now trying it. The sergeant told us to move back from the door. The TSA officer lifted a length of metal from the floor that had once been part of a chair rack. She held it low, like a broom, not like a weapon. The janitor stared at the maintenance door and then at his keys. He selected one by touch alone. It was thin and silver and scratched. "If that door goes," he said, "we can go out the back." It did not go. The banging stopped. Then the lights blinked and came back. The TSA officer breathed out through her nose, too slow for relief. "Okay," she said, "we're going to put together pairs. If someone needs water, ask your buddy. If you need the restroom, tell your buddy. We're not going anywhere alone." She pointed at me and the skateboard boy. "You two." She pointed at the volunteer and the child. "With me." She matched the business-suited man with the woman with the messenger bag. She did it quickly, without the consultation one would use in a classroom. My buddy introduced himself as Jet. He said he skateboards in a parking structure near Manhattan Beach, and he can ride down the spiral ramp without touching his feet to the ground. I told him about a hill in my city where you could run so fast down the steps that you felt like your shoes were inventing a new law of gravity. He laughed with the soft sound of a person who might laugh again someday. The sergeant spoke with someone on the radio who had a different cadence than airport staff. A paramedic, maybe. "We can hold," the sergeant said, "but I need the buses to make the run if we get the corridor clear." A pause. "I know." "Then you tell me what you want me to do with babies and grandmothers." "No, I'm not being dramatic. I'm making sure you hear me." He listened again. Then, Copy. He looked older after he hung up, although he did not physically change. He drank from his own bottle and set it down empty. Time stretches in secure rooms because there are no windows for the sun to argue with. The janitor returned and whispered to the TSA officer that there was a vending machine in the service corridor with bottled juices. Cash only, he said, apologetic as if he owned the machine. I don't control the prices. Highway robbery. The skateboard boy produced a wad of small bills. The business-suited man had exact change, with the quick hands of someone who has tipped many bartenders. We pooled cash and the TSA officer authorized a quiet trip with the janitor and me to the machine. 2 minutes, she said, and if anything looks wrong, you come back without arguing. The maintenance corridor smelled like the back of a classroom. Dust, paper, the chemical sweetness of cleaner. The vending machine hummed. I fed it a $5 bill, and it shook its head. The janitor slapped the side with a practiced flick, and the machine accepted the bill grudgingly and tried to spit change. Coins tumbled into the tray like a small metallic landslide. I selected bottled apple juice and orange. I selected water because water gives you choices. The janitor listened down the corridor with the ear of a person who knows what normal sounds like in the back halls of a building, and what does not. We were at the door with our arms laden when a scream cut down the hallway like a rip in fabric. It came from the direction of the main concourse. The janitor didn't run. He did not freeze either. He set his hand to the back of my jacket and guided me with pressure like you use to steer a shopping cart straight when one wheel wants to turn. Move, he said evenly. We moved. Back in the secure room, the sergeant had his radio in both hands, nearly up to his mouth. Say again, he said. The voice came through so broken that if words were bricks, only powder reached him. He said, understood. He looked at the door, which looked back in silence. Change of plan, he said. We're holding until first light. He did not say what would be different about the light. He did not promise buses. How we slept is not interesting, except that we did. And that's the part you might not have expected. People sleep in the places they can when they are allowed the time. The TSA officer slept sitting against the wall with her metal bar across her lap and her chin sunk to her chest. The volunteer slept with the child on one side and a chair leg on the other. The janitor slept like a person who trusts doors and keys, his key ring pressed under his elbow. I slept with my head on my backpack, one strap around my wrist, because I have seen enough signs warning about unattended bags to know how easily things roll away. I woke to the janitor's whisper. You hear that? He said. The skateboard boy snored softly. The business-suited man murmured in his sleep, a line of words in which bank and loan appeared like rocks in a stream. The janitor tilted his head toward the maintenance door. The sound coming through it was a voice. Not close. A voice that carried because it had a microphone. It was not a PA announcement. It was a human with a bullhorn. Parking structure 3, the voice said. Staging at dawn, it said. Do not attempt to move now. Hold your position. The words came in and out like a car passing under bridge lights. Parking structure 3, the skateboard boy said, awake without transition. That's in the central loop, the janitor said, across from Terminal 3. That's a long way from here. The TSA officer was already up. We don't even know if that message is for us, she said. The sergeant said, it's for anyone who can hear it. He nodded at the janitor. Can you get us to the sky bridge over international arrivals? The janitor made a face like a math teacher asked to solve a calculus problem on the spot. Yeah, he said, but you won't like it. We did not go immediately. The sergeant insisted on waiting until there was a line of grey in the thin strip of daylight that the janitor could see through a service vent. There's movement out there, the janitor said. Too many shadows with legs. We ate crackers. The child accepted a sip of apple juice and blinked as if his body had forgotten sweetness existed. I made a second crane from a scrap of boarding pass. He put it in his pocket with the seriousness of someone storing a tool. At last, the sergeant said, we go. He appointed the order in case of a rush. TSA officer first, janitor to navigate, families next, then pairs. He took the rear. He gave a second metal bar to the business-suited man, who looked at it as if it were a briefcase in a courtroom and then gripped it tightly. his knuckles the color of soap. The maintenance corridor to the sky bridge was narrow, with panels along the walls that hummed softly. The janitor's keys turned somber, each lock giving up a small click. We came to a door labeled mechanical, and he said, "We cross through this to get to the bridge. Keep your voices down because the grate on the other side overlooks the interior." The word overlooks felt wrong. It implied control. He opened the door. The mechanical room had a catwalk and a fan big enough to push a person backwards if he got too close. The air here was warm, as if the building's heart was under the floor. We stepped along the catwalk with a new kind of careful. Not the kind that comes from fear of being caught, but from fear of falling into the machinery of the city. A grate gave us a partial view of the arrivals hall below. It was not a movie scene. It was a complicated picture of inaction. People pressed against glass doors that opened and closed as if on a timer, then froze, then opened again. A security officer stood on a counter and waved his arms, and half the people watched him, and half did not. Here and there, someone walked in a way that you do not walk when your mind is home. They moved on rails the rest of us could not see. "Eyes front," the sergeant said politely. The janitor led us across to a second door that opened onto the structure of the sky bridge. We stood inside the bones of it for a moment, the beams like a ship's ribs. On the far side, the door to the walkway itself was locked. The janitor fit a key into the cylinder, and it did not turn. He tried another. He found the one with a notch shaped like a bitten cookie, and the lock yielded. He pushed the door, and a slice of Los Angeles morning came in, pale and tentative. The sky bridge had glass on both sides. The city below looked like someone had pressed pause on a busy street. Cars clogged the loop. Some were empty. Some had people inside, resting their foreheads against steering wheels. A coach bus with an electronic sign that read, "Special," idled at the curb near parking structure 3. I could see uniforms forming a line. I could also see the other thing, moving in the gaps, turning slowly, as if searching for gravity instead of prey. I do not know what to call them that makes it sound clinical and safe. People without themselves. We walked. This is the part where in a story you would expect a rush, a shattering of glass, a sprint. It was not like that. The day had its own speed, and we matched it. The TSA officer moved with the kind of gait you learn from long shifts, steady and sustainable. The janitor took each set of double doors like a small test. The sergeant paused to listen at every transition point, not for screaming, but for that particular wrongness we had learned to hear. A scraping without intention, a breath that never resets. Halfway across, a man in a maintenance uniform appeared at the far end of the bridge. He lifted both hands, palms out. His face wore a confusion that looked like a new skin he had not grown into yet. He said something we did not hear through the glass. The TSA officer shouted, "We're coming through," and he pointed behind him and shook his head. He tried to open the door to us and could not. He pressed his forehead to the glass and the motion left a mark that did not fog. Then he stepped away and moved like a sleepwalker down the far hall. The janitor met the far lock with his bitten cookie key. It turned. We slid into the terminal connector and closed the door behind us as if closing a chapter could edit the page before it. The connector emptied into a stairwell down to street level. "No elevators," the sergeant said. "Stairs only." He sent the TSA officer down first and she moved like a scout. We followed. The child's shoes made a squeak on each step that sounded like protest, and then even the squeak tired and went silent. At the base, a corridor led to a set of crash doors that opened to the sidewalk. The coach bus's roof was visible through the window in the door. A soldier stood by the bus with a list on a clipboard, and his mouth shaped words into a bullhorn. "Oh," lined by families. "Identification later. We need you to move now." A second soldier watched the sidewalk. Behind him, across the lane, a figure turned slowly, the way a weather vane turns in low wind. The sergeant put his hand on the crash bar and looked at the TSA officer. She nodded. The janitor touched his keys like someone making sure his pocket still held the money for rent. The business-suited man exhaled. My buddy Jet shifted his skateboard so it would not clatter. The volunteer curled the child against her shoulder, his head tucked into that soft place between neck and collarbone where children fit when the world is strange. "On 3, the sergeant said. The word 3 was not for drama, it was for timing. Inside me, I counted 2. 1, 2. He stopped. The crash doors bowed inward as something outside pressed against them without understanding how doors or pressure work. Not a slam, a patient wait. The glass trembled in its frame. A palm, grey and uncurious, splayed against the pane. Fingers spread as if measuring the world. The sergeant did not pull the bar. He waited. The figure slid away. Another took its place, then fell out of frame entirely, as if it had forgotten floors can tilt if you lean wrong. We waited a full 20 seconds after the weight disappeared. It was the longest 20 seconds I have known. He did not open the door. He stepped back. "Different exit," he said. The janitor nodded without offense. "There's a side hatch for deliveries," he said. "It comes out by the loading docks. That's 2 lanes over. Less traffic, less eyes." He led us through a narrower corridor, past boxes of plastic cutlery and paper cups. He paused at the hatch, listened, then pressed the bar and eased it open. Cool air, even cooler for Los Angeles, slipped in like a ribbon. We stepped into a canyon of concrete between the building and the loading dock walls. The air smelled like wet cardboard and fuel. The coach bus was visible to our right, not far, but separated by lanes and low barricades. A soldier saw us and raised his arm in a circle, the sign for move. The janitor pointed left instead. "There's a gap in the barricade," he whispered. "Past that dumpster." The TSA officer took point again. We moved in fits, not a sprint, not a stroll. Twice, figures turned toward us, and then turned away again, as if some other magnet pulled harder. Once, a woman stood in the lane and swayed. She looked 20. She held a passport in one hand like a talisman, open to a page with her picture. Her mouth moved around a phrase she did not finish. The TSA officer reached for her, and then did not. The sergeant shook his head. One small movement that looked impersonal, but would sit with him later. We were not enough people to be 2 groups. At the gap in the barricade, we filed through. The coach bus's door folded open, and a thin line of people ascended. The soldier with the clipboard gestured vigorously, trying to push the line forward with hands and voice. Another soldier stood on the lowest bus step like a sentry. Between us and that door, a man in a suit fell. He did not trip. He sat down as if his body had decided to practice for a future when chairs would be rare. He stayed there. A woman knelt in front of him and put her hands on his face and spoke his name over and over. The clipboard soldier saw us and cut a path with his arm, palm down. He said, "Families first," and the volunteer moved like someone in a hallway drill. The boy's head bobbed. The business-suited man went after them. I went with Jet and the janitor. The TSA officer looked left and right and then left again, the way you do even if traffic moves one way. We reached the bus steps. The soldier on the steps said, "ID later, move now." And I thought of the page in my passport with the new stamp and wished it would become a door I could step through. Then the sound changed. It was not a scream. It was not a groan. It was the sound of many feet moving without choreography. A patter without runners. A collective hush of fabric sliding. Heads turned in a wave. The sound came from the far end of the lane, where a service gate had opened. A cluster of figures came through and then became a cluster of bodies. They moved slowly, but there were enough of them that slow added to slow became something else. One brushed the back of another, and both adjusted without looking at each other, like birds in a flock that had forgotten how to look up. "Go, go," the soldier said, and our line tried to compress into the door. People squeezed together and then stopped, because the human body keeps its own minimum safe following distance even when the mind wants to erase it. The janitor touched my elbow and tugged backward. "Back door," he said. The TSA officer made the same calculation and pulled the volunteer away from the step, not roughly, but with decision. The soldier shouted for us to wait. The sergeant said, "We're not clogging your door, we'll take the next one," and the soldier's face flickered with gratitude and fear and the need to keep the list in order. We retreated 10 steps and slid along the wall. The figures moving in from the gate did not rush. They did not detect us like predators in a nature show. They filled space the way water does when a barrier cracks. A man near the bus door turned to look at them and did not move. The soldier at the steps raised his arm, lowered it, raised it again. He had a weapon slung, but his eyes were on the list. He was a man trying to keep a promise he had written down by hand. The janitor's back door led into a room with mop sinks and racks of paper towels. Beyond it, another corridor, and beyond that, a service elevator with the panel open and a key switch. The janitor shook his head. "We said no elevators," he muttered to himself. He shut the panel and led us through a set of stairs that ended at a glass door looking out on the side of the parking structure. There was a ramp down one level that would take us to the bus lanes again. There were fewer people here. There were also fewer soldiers. We paused behind a concrete pillar and watched the pattern. The figures moved like they were looking for something the earth had concealed. They pivoted toward noise. When a car horn blared in the distance, their heads turned. Their bodies followed. When nothing sounded, they wandered until a barrier redirected them. Their eyes did not show confusion or hunger. They showed nothing. It was that nothing that was hardest to bear. The sergeant said, "We're going to the far side of the ramp, then cut across when the bus pulls to take the line." He said it like a plan he had been handed 20 minutes ago and had adapted in 5. We moved along the shadowed side of the ramp. The volunteer counted quietly. 1, 2, 3, with each of the child's steps. Jet carried his board like a tray. The business-suited man kept his bar close to his leg, like a cane he refused to use. Halfway across, a figure stepped out from behind a pillar in front of us. He wore a ground crew vest. He had a smear of something dark along his cheek like he had leaned against a tire. He stood too close and then closer. The TSA officer raised her hands and said, "Stop, sir, stop." And he did not. He kept walking until his body met the pressure of her palms, and only then did he reel back slightly, not from understanding, but from physics. The sergeant slipped in, guided us around, one by one, as if we were dancers in a line who had forgotten the next step. We cleared him and turned the final corner to the lane. The bus had moved. A second bus had taken its place. The clipboard soldier had found a new group to shape. The figures at the far gate had spread like a stain. The janitor pointed to the shadow under the sky bridge. "There," he said. "We can hold there if the lane goes bad." It did not feel like a victory. It felt like choosing the next room to learn. We made the last crossing. A woman dropped her suitcase and did not pick it up. The kid reached out from the volunteer's shoulder and touched the suitcase handle as if to steady it. The soldier at the bus saw us and made the small circling motion again with his hand, the same one my elementary school teacher used to speed up a story. The TSA officer shook her head, indicating we would not join that line. She pointed to the shadowed place and the soldier nodded, understanding that flow matters more than fairness. Under the sky bridge, the concrete felt cooler. The sound of the city came in layers. Helicopters in the distance, the whir of a generator, voices braided into a rope that drew tight and then slackened. The soldier with the bullhorn spoke again. "Parking structure 3, dawn staging, 1 line. Listen for instructions." The words meant less now than the fact that someone was steady enough to say them. We slid into a maintenance alcove. It had a door that could be pulled and locked from the inside with a bar. The janitor set the bar in place. The space was small, but not crushing, big enough for us to breathe without taking each other's air. A small window gave a slice of the lane. The sergeant knelt to tie his boot, not because it needed tying, but because he needed to perform a human act with a beginning and an end. The TSA officer checked her radio and got only static and looked at it as if it were a stubborn pet. I sat and put my backpack on my knees and realized my hands were sticky from the juice bottle. I wiped them on my jeans and decided that jeans are built for that. The child took out the paper crane and made it flap once, gently. The business-suited man looked at me. "You're a student," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "So you will write this," he said, in the tone of someone assigning homework. I told him I wasn't sure. He nodded like he had expected that answer and accepted it, the way a person accepts a weather report. We watched the sliver of lane through the small window and learned the pattern. The buses would stage, load, pull. The next bus would take the place. The figures in the lane would move towards sound, then drift. A woman with a stroller stood at the curb and did not wave for help because waving is a language you use when you think someone will understand. She stood until a volunteer guided her. The stroller rolled. The baby slept. I had the sense that if the world could sleep through this, it might also wake. That sense did not survive the next minute, but I note it. We needed a plan to cross from our shadow to the bus door without joining the crush or drawing the attention of the wrong sort of eyes. The sergeant looked at the janitor and then at me and Jet. "When the horn sounds on the far side," he said, "the line turns. We go when the line turns, and the sound pulls them that way." He wasn't talking about the bus horn. He meant the larger horn, the spill of noise when a gate opened. He had turned observation into a lever. We waited. There is no poetry to waiting. There is only the count of a breath in and out, and the disagreements you have with yourself silently. I thought about the dorm room with a key in an envelope at a desk somewhere. I thought about my mother recording the morning news in the kitchen out of habit, so she could watch it later without commercials. I thought about the paper crane's sharp wings, and the way, if you unfold it, the paper remembers every crease. The far gate opened. The sound arrived. The sergeant pointed. We stood in a sequence we had already walked in the room, like a drill repeated to cloth the body and muscle memory. The janitor unbarred the door. The TSA officer stepped into the light. The lane belonged to us for a count of 10, maybe 12. We began to move. If you want the neat version, the one a news clip uses with clean edits, you say we crossed. We did. But we did it as humans do at the tail end of an hour of being human. Not in a line. Not with dignity designed by a director. We went with elbows, with patience, with 3 steps forward and 1 sideways to avoid a body that had decided the ground was a bed. We went with a soft word to a stranger and a firm hand for a friend. The soldier at the steps made room without knowing our names. The clipboard man did not scold us for ruining his columns. We went. At the threshold, the volunteer handed the child up and then climbed with the kind of controlled fear that gets you through a narrow door. Jet handed his board to the soldier like a precious thing that did not look like one, and the soldier tucked it behind a seat. The business-suited man took the bar up with him like a cane, and then, when he reached the bus floor, he leaned it against the seat and exhaled. The janitor went last among us, and then the sergeant, who turned at the door and scanned the lane for the next group he might be able to shepherd with emotion. Inside, the bus smelled like vinyl and last week's cleaning. The windows showed the lane as if already in a museum, behind glass. The soldier shouted the words we had read in his mouth before. "ID later. Sit now." A driver adjusted his mirrors twice, the way someone checks his own reflection when he is not sure it is still him. A woman near me whispered a prayer so softly I recognized no words, only the structure of them. A thud against the side of the bus. Not hard, not a threat. A hand, grey and uncurious, slid down the glass, leaving a dry trail. The driver flinched and then set his hands at 10 and 2. The soldier tapped the glass with his knuckles like knocking on a neighbor's door you have been told to avoid. The hand slid away. We pulled into motion, and the lane moved around us like water around a slow boat. The soldier with the bullhorn faded into a corner of the window, and then we took a curve that showed a stack of cars on a ramp like toys. The soldier with the clipboard turned to his radio and said something that looked like a report. The bus engine made a sound like commitment. "Where are we going?" Jet asked. Not to me in particular. The soldier said, "Staging," and then, softer, "We'll see." The TSA officer leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for the count of 5, then opened them again because sleep can become a trapdoor if you let it. The janitor pulled a bottle of water from his pocket like a magician and handed it down the row. The business-suited man unfolded a napkin and wiped his hands carefully, as if to return them to the shape they had had before the morning. I took out the acceptance packet and looked at the campus map. A line of pinpointed trees along a walkway. A photo of a building with glass like the skin of a calm lake. In another life, I would have taken a rideshare there and worried about something small, like whether my roommate would like my music. Here, I listened to the engine and the bus's slow climb into the structure's spiral. Through the window, the famous pylons at the entrance stood as blue columns in the daylight, less magical than at night, but still like teeth around a mouth. We topped the ramp and the bus came to a stop in a wide area where soldiers had set folding tables. A banner stretched between 2 poles read, Reception. It looked like a word for a party instead of a staging area. A paramedic raised his hand and guided us to a line. A woman in a suit with an airport ID asked for names and wrote them on a pad with a ballpoint pen that had stopped clicking years ago. The soldier told the driver, "Hold, we'll send you again when we clear a lane." A helicopter beat the air above us like someone knocking at a door no one would open. The buses didn't mean safety, not exactly. They meant movement, and in the absence of answers, movement had started to look a lot like hope. A paramedic crouched to check the boy's forehead, fingers grazing gently like he didn't want to wake a dream. "You're burning up, little man," he murmured, then glanced at the volunteer. "We'll get him seen. Might be a nurse, might be no one. Triage is thin today." He didn't apologize for it. We each got a paper wristband, highlighter yellow like the stickers back in the terminal. Mine said B217. It felt flimsy, barely there, but somehow it made things feel official, like we belonged to a system that still knew what to do. The man in the suit quietly hid his under his shirt cuff. The janitor slipped his through a belt loop, muttering something about swelling in the heat. The TSA officer, ever meticulous, pressed her thumb along the adhesive seam and gave it a test tug, like she was making sure it wouldn't betray her later. Then a man stood up on a plastic crate, suit wrinkled, megaphone missing. His voice didn't carry like it should have, but people still turned toward him because he sounded like someone who believed what he was saying. "We're relocating in waves," he announced. "Designated shelters by zone, families and medical priority first." He paused just long enough to scan the crowd and offer a promise. "We'll come back for the rest." He meant it. I could hear it in the way his voice broke just slightly over the word "come," and somehow that was enough to make people nod along. Not because they believed him, but because pretending we did was easier than what came next. The volunteer with the child was pulled first, moved into a smaller line to the right. The boy looked over her shoulder at me as they went, eyelids drooping, cheeks flushed. I raised the paper crane and made it flap once. He smiled a little, then did it back, tiny fingers making a bird without wings. If this was a story written the way people expect stories to end, I tell you I ran after them, or that I stayed behind to protect someone else. Maybe that I slipped away to find my university dorm, following a street name from the back of a form. But the truth, I did what most people do. I stayed where I was told. We lined up like cattle and stared at a bus that didn't even have a route number anymore. Just a handwritten placard jammed in the front window. The wheels hissed against the concrete like it hated stopping. I counted the seconds between when one bus pulled away and the next one arrived. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because it was something I could control. Jet stood beside me, quiet now. His skateboard was tucked under one arm like a carry-on. He looked down the line, then back toward the barricades, and whispered something I didn't catch. I didn't ask him to repeat it. Some things are better left between a person and the air. The woman with the badge, the same one from earlier, the one with the printed-on smile, was now taking names with a clipboard. She didn't bother asking questions anymore, just looked at your wristband and waved you forward. We moved a few steps, then stopped, then moved again. The buses circled like they weren't sure whether they wanted to pick us up or not, like they were afraid of getting too close. I watched the city stretch beyond the airport perimeter, its streets unfamiliar, its signs familiar, and nothing in either of them making sense anymore. It felt like being dropped into a dream that didn't speak your language, even if all the words looked right. A man behind me said something about the CDC. Someone else mentioned FEMA. None of it felt real, like we were reciting acronyms to pretend the adults were still in charge. The soldier posted at the far gate said nothing. He just watched the perimeter like he'd already seen what was coming and didn't know how to stop it. When our turn came, the door opened with a sharp hiss. The soldier standing beside it nodded at us. Not a welcome, just permission. The sergeant who had guided us all the way from the terminal stood back, one hand resting loosely on the sling of his weapon. He wasn't going with us. I found a seat by the window, the same kind of vinyl-covered bench every airport shuttle uses, except this time, the emergency exit instructions didn't feel optional. Outside, The wind kicked up a plastic bag that danced between tires and caught on a barricade. Behind it, across the pavement, one of the infected stood alone, motionless, just standing there, not facing us, not moving. It wasn't doing anything, and that somehow made it worse. The engine groaned to life. The soldier raised his hand and signaled forward. As the bus began to roll, I felt that strange pull again, the urge to open my phone and text someone, anyone, and say where I was, say I was safe, say something. But I still didn't know what to say. We drove away from the terminal and toward a new unknown, toward whatever counted as a shelter now. The city outside the window looked too big to fix. And yet, somewhere in its tangle of freeways and flickering lights, someone was still organizing buses. Someone was still drawing plans on clipboards. And somewhere out there, maybe, someone had already stopped waiting. This isn't the end. It's just where the line stopped for today.